We're going to talk a little sports media right now, some Notre Dame, NBC TV, and all that kind of good stuff with Andrew Marchand from the New York Post, the sports media columnist there, and also the co-host of the excellent Marchand and Ourand Sports Media podcast. Appreciate you doing this, first of all, today, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I wanted to ask you this because I've listened to your podcast since you guys started, you and John Ourand, and I've heard you mention plenty of times. You used to be on the New York Yankees beat before you kind of made this segue into sports media, and I'm curious how you make that move from one of the really the biggest beats in probably all of sports, and now you're covering sports media.
So yeah, it first goes back to when I first joined the New York Post, which was in late 1997. I was about 22, 23 at that point, and I covered sports media. I was like an entry-level position. From there, I got the Met job. I was covering the Mets for a couple of years. After that, went back to covering sports media. And then I was hired by ESPN to cover all New York sports, really focusing on the radio station in New York. And then that moved into covering the Yankees. So I did that with one of the greats, New York, Wally Matthews. The two of us covered the Yankees for a long time there, for about 6 years, I should say. And then I really wanted to kind of move off of baseball. I mean, baseball is great. I love baseball, but it never ends. The games never end. The season never ends. The offseason never ends. You're away a lot. And my passion is really, for whatever reason, I love sports. I love media. So doing both is really where my biggest passion is. And so I was lucky enough that Chris Shaw at the New York Post, Mark Hale, our two top sports editors, they hired me, and here we are.
So I just figured maybe you grew up wanting to be the next Rudy Martzke or something.
I read Rudy, Bill Mushnick, Raceman, all these guys. Look, I don't know if I had a goal to get into sports media. I don't really know if it was exactly to cover sports media, but I always loved those columns. I mean, I definitely was one of the people who would get that USA Today every Monday morning or Wednesday and Friday and want to read Rudy.
It was unique back then. I guess the niche has kind of grown a little bit since then. Before we get specifically into the NBC Notre Dame booth and some of that kind of stuff, as someone again who covers this for a living, and you talk about a lot of different broadcast booths and kind of the minutia of the trade quite a bit. Who do you think is the best college football play-by-play announcer and analyst right now?
It's a good question. I don't want to give you a full answer, but just off the top of my head, like I want to just think. I'd have to think about everybody, make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. But I would say I might go with Jason Benetti, who just went to Fox with talks with NBC.
Right.
And then that didn't happen. He ended up at Fox from ESPN. He might be my answer. Again, I'd have to look at it. Sean McDonough is excellent.
I've always liked
McDonough is excellent. Some people love Gus Johnson. For me, it's not I think he's okay, but it's not my favorite. And Chris Fowler, I've been on record. I don't think he's a great play-by-play. So,
yeah. He took a different path. Most of those other guys that you mentioned took a specific play-by-play path to get there. Obviously, he did a lot of studio stuff before he got there. And I think any of those guys, especially the ones at the top, like Fowler and Herb Street, which is essentially, I guess, the number one booth in college football, very polarizing because just like with, you hear it more with Joe Buck, but being someone who's, like me, who's connected to a college football audience, we hear about Fowler and Herb Street hate our team all the time. So
yeah, I don't really get into that because I
don't either.
I get it that people feel that way, and that's it's most times a misnomer, right? I get it. Your team's losing, and a play-by-play or color analyst is getting very excited about the other team's success, and I can see from a fan's point of view, it's be like, they love these guys, but I don't really see that. I mean, maybe there's sometimes, but I think most broadcasters, most writers just really want a good game to call or write about. That's really what they're rooting for. And so, if you're Joe Buck and the Yankees are winning, then, some people say you love the Yankees. And even when you're doing it, even when the team's doing well, then people say, well, you're not excited enough for that team doing well. So you can't really win with a national audience when you're doing a national broadcast in terms of the local, pleasing everybody.
Right. The NBC booth is a little different just because it's geared specific. You know, it's a Notre Dame home game every time they have a broadcast. Jack Collinsworth, Jason Garrett, two really inexperienced guys, just finished their first season together, and really they're, for either one of them, first season calling football. So I'm curious what you thought of that booth specifically.
Yeah, it's been okay. I was a little surprised. Like I'd heard, basically the whole offseason that it was going to be Jack Collinsworth. He's replacing Mike Tirico, who's now doing Sunday Night Football and is in line for a Super Bowl in a couple of years. And that's the top of the profession. That's the pinnacle
Right.
for sportscasters. So Jack Collinsworth is inexperienced. He's 27, Notre Dame grad. His father, of course, is on NBC's Sunday Night crew as the analyst. And so to me, it's gotten a little bit better as he's gone on. But to me, Notre Dame on NBC is not a job that you're learning on. It's not maybe it's not the top job in college football in terms of doing 6-7 games a year, but it's Notre Dame. There's a reason they get so much money and they can be an independent, as you guys know.
TV.
Yeah, exactly. You guys, I don't have to explain to you about who Notre Dame is to this audience that you have. But so that was surprising. Jason Garrett, again, they generally haven't had people as the analysts with Notre Dame connections. Mike Golic and Golic Jr., they're dying to do Notre Dame. And they, for whatever reason, do not choose those guys. I think Jason Garrett's been okay. I think he sees the game well. And as an ex-coach, ex-NFL quarterback. And so I think it's been okay. I think when you look at his performance, if he was with a more experienced play-by-player, and not all play-by-players, even experienced ones, are good at this, but they can bring you to the right places where you need to go. And that's really important. And that's for Jason Garrett, having someone who's sort of still learning a little bit in Jack Collinsworth probably is not the best partner.
Yeah, and that's I felt like that all along, that they're like, especially when you go from a Mike Tirico to essentially an entry-level play-by-play guy, there's a huge drop-off just in the play-by-play level. You're always going to have some inexperience, I think, with the analyst, because there's all these, last year it was Drew Brees coming straight off the field and into the booth, and now Jason Garrett. I will say, as a lifelong Dallas Cowboys fan who obviously has some, whatever connection with Jason Garrett along those lines, I was actually a little, from a pure X and O standpoint, I was a little bit more impressed with him than I thought I might be when the season started.
Yeah, I think, again, you see this with Notre Dame. I think most coaches that are intelligent can really see the game, right? If you didn't like him as the Cowboys coach, he didn't win enough, he was there a long time, and they really didn't advance far ever in the postseason, I can understand not liking him. But the idea that he doesn't know the game or doesn't really see
he knows the game.
Yeah, exactly. So you're getting that with the broadcast, and his getting in and getting out, he's been pretty good about. That's something you have to learn. It's hard. Doing games is probably the hardest thing to do, right? Studio, it's very controlled. You get to discuss it beforehand. You know when they're going to come to you. You know what they're going to ask you. You kind of know what you're going to say. Doing games is harder. It's a lot. The best play-by-players are going off the cuff, and they obviously have sayings and things that they turn to, but you got to be in the moment, and that takes repetition. That's the biggest thing. We talked at the beginning about Fowler. Now he's gotten better over the years, and when he first started, he's probably lucky I was still covering the Yankees. When he first started, he was not, as replacing Brent Musburger and getting the #1 gig. He wasn't there. He's gotten a little better, but that comes from repetition. And like anything, I've written a million stories. So there's not really much that's going to come up that I haven't done before. Sure. And that, especially in the big moments and you're doing bigger games, that helps you, because it's I just got to do the same thing I've done the other 1,000 times. Just do it again. When you're new and you're doing it on such a big stage, it's hard when something, there's a weird call or it's unclear what happened. That's a learning process that, generally speaking, you don't want to do on NBC on national TV.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Golics, and NBC's had this contract now for basically 3 decades, and They've got the exclusivity to Notre Dame home football games. They're the bulk of their audience, we all assume, is Notre Dame fans. But they have made the decision. They have never had a Notre Dame alum. Collinsworth is the only one, and he's a play-by-play guy.
Yep.
But they've never had an analyst in the booth with Notre Dame connections, whether it's a former player or a former coach. So I'm wondering, as someone like you who covers this on a macro level and obviously has, no dog in the game here, like what you think about which direction they should be going with us with such a unique booth like this that is a Notre Dame home football game every weekend.
So I believe in going with the best or good, right? So if you evaluate Mike Golic as an analyst that he's good, then I think it's fine that if he has a Notre Dame, if he went to Notre Dame, and obviously there's a love for Notre Dame, with the idea that as critical as you can be on a college broadcast, where you have a contract with an institution, so there's going to be whatever anybody wants to say. You're not going to be like crushing Notre Dame most likely, and you don't need to do that necessarily, but you just need to be able to see the game and call it as if you didn't go to Notre Dame. So in my opinion, I think it'd be fine to hire someone for Notre Dame. Now, you don't want a raw broadcast. It is NBC. I get it. They have to deal with Notre Dame, but they play USC, some years, that game's, and whoever they're playing, you have to respect, you have to do a total broadcast, right? Who'd they lose to at the beginning? Toledo? Was that the game they lost?
No, Marshall. They played Toledo last year. Marshall was the one. Yeah, Marshall this year.
So Marshall, that game, that was Jack Collinsworth's initial broadcast. That game, they did not tell the story of Marshall well enough. I get it. It's disappointing, and there's a huge Notre Dame angle, but you need to tell me Marshall's story on a national broadcast when they're having this significant upset, and they didn't do enough of that. And that's, again, I can't put that on Garrett. I got to put that more on Collinsworth, because he's the one who needs to lead the way and understand how you're going to do this broadcast. And so, so just overall, to answer your question, I don't think you have to not have a Notre Dame person. I think you could have an analyst who's from Notre Dame. They just have to be really good. That's it. Just be really good.
Well, yeah. I mean, Brady Quinn is the guy who Notre Dame fans have been wanting for years. I'm completely with you. I think the Golics would be great. It's a guy with the net, but like Brady Quinn he's got a contract right now with Fox, and again, like anytime this comes up, the first thing people say, Brady Quinn, we want Brady Quinn. These we just saw some moving around, some trading of properties to get like Buck and Aikman to go over to ESPN from Fox. How difficult is it for someone like Brady Quinn, theoretically, to get out of a contract like that if NBC made it worth his while?
Well, I think the making it worth his while thing is the problem, because when you look at his gig, I don't know exactly what he makes, but it's 12 to 15 weeks when you probably get through it all in terms of big noon kickoff. Then he does a couple NFL games here and there. He's on some of their shows during the week, right? Notre Dame 6-7 games a year. And so I just don't think that's probably going to work out, just because they're on the same day. It's not like you could say, all right, we'll share them. I mean, the games are Saturdays, predominantly. And so, so I don't think that works. In theory it does, but I don't think in practice. I think the issue is, Fox, his gig with Fox is too much better and more lucrative, I would presume, than what Notre Dame would likely pay him, or NBC would likely pay him to do Notre Dame.
I know you're on a little bit of a time crunch, so I'll kind of go. We've got a segment.
I got a couple minutes.
You got a little bit of time. Okay. I was going to say I could go rapid fire with some of this, other stuff, but one of the things, like back to NBC has been simulcasting these games on Peacock. One of the things I said last summer is, why not do something a little bit different? If you're going to put a sort of a neutral party or, whoever in the main booth, why don't you put the Golics on Peacock and let them do a Manning cast kind of thing?
That's a pretty good idea. I mean, I think probably when they look at the finances of what that would bring in, they probably say, it's not really worth it. Monday Night Football is a unique situation. I mean, if you look at some of the other alternate broadcasts, they really, are they worth it when you're bringing in 100,000, 150,000 people, which you have to, you don't even know, would they just be watching the main telecast if they weren't watching the altcast? The Mannings, you get into the 1.5 to 2 million range, and it's Monday Night Football, and NFL is the most important property for all these networks, including ESPN. So it makes more sense there. But it's not a bad idea, and I think that's where we're going, right? Because as streaming becomes more prevalent, the idea of having multiple ways to present these games is important. I think the leagues and universities and teams are all going to look for that, because especially the younger demographic, they don't watch the same way as you and I did growing up. And so, how do you reach them so you have that same audience and they're not just watching highlights or waiting to see what, it's on Snapchat if there's a, big run, or Twitter, or whichever social media they like. And so I do think there will be alt casts. I'd say for this situation, my presumption would be it's just not it's not financially feasible or prudent for them to do it. But perhaps in the future they'll change their mind on that.
Now, Notre Dame, along with the Pac-12, are two of the bigger dominoes to fall in terms of contracts that are the Pac-12. I know, again, listening to you guys, that still kind of goes back and forth. It seems like maybe they're close and then they're not, but Notre Dame is still a couple years away from having to do something. But I'm curious, do you think that, like, one, this NBC contract with the Big Ten, the fact that they're going to get this primetime game, what impact that has potentially on Notre Dame going forward, as well as are there other potential bidders besides NBC out there for Notre Dame going forward?
Well, Notre Dame could probably get more money. I mean, I think they've been loyal to NBC, and they get paid well, from what I understand. I've heard numbers, but I'm not sure exactly what the number is. But they're in a good position. I mean, because the way these networks look at the teams, like when they talk about expansion, you talk about the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the Pac-12, and they look at the schools individually, like how much are they worth? And Notre Dame's worth the most. They're the most important individual school. That's why in the agreements with CBS and NBC and Fox, Fox has some ownership in the Big 12, Big 10 network, so it's a little bit more complicated with them. Notre Dame has a number put on it. My colleague John Ourand reported that. And that is because they're Notre Dame, right? The other ones, it's like, well, if you bring in this team, we'll open up negotiations and try to be fair about it. And the networks are likely going to say, all right, we open them up and we're not giving you any more money. You want to bring another team? Divvy up the billions that you're getting already, and right. Notre Dame is special. And it's probably worth it for these, if they ever, you guys have sure talked about this a million times, but if they ever did go to a conference full time, what that would mean, and they bring great value. And so I think for now, in my opinion, and you're closer to it, so maybe you could shed light on it. I think they're going to stay independent for at least the next few years because they can. I don't think they need to necessarily join a conference. Maybe at some point they will, but not yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because throughout the course of the season, we always talk to a beat writer from whoever Notre Dame is playing and that kind of thing. So I've talked to different guys from around the country, and it's all these people are convinced that it's Notre Dame's going to be in the Big Ten within the next 3 to 4 years, and that the biggest thing, one, was the expansion of the playoff field. They've got greater access to the playoff now with a 12-team field within the next couple of years. But part two is this TV contract, and Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director, has been pretty steadfast with that. So I think the biggest question is they're not going to get $100 million like the Big Ten and the SEC are getting per year, but how close at least to that number can they get to make it worth their while, to allow them to stay independent going forward?
Yeah, I think they probably come pretty close. I mean, I would be surprised if they can't. I mean, obviously football driving the bus there, but again, I don't know the reasoning and the intricacies that you guys know about Notre Dame in terms of why they do it, but in terms of attractiveness as for TV, Notre Dame is number one. They're the Cowboys of college football, the Yankees of college football, whatever analogy you want to make. They're the Notre Dame of college football.
Yep, absolutely. Well, again, that Big Ten primetime package, we started off talking about announcers. I mean, that's next year. There's going to be Big Ten games on NBC a year from now. As of right now, Collinsworth and Garrett, that's the only announcing crew they have. I mean, they're going to have to come up with some more faces, voices, whatever. You mentioned Jason Benetti. He's on Fox now. It seems like, I don't know, any early idea on what they could do with those booths?
Yeah, no, I think they're trying to figure it out. Probably, they're probably working on some things. We'll try to find, as soon as I know, I'll let you guys know, but I don't know exactly. I think they did like Benetti a lot, so maybe a Benetti type they could go after. But that would have been a good hire. They had him doing baseball on Peacock,
right?
And I think if they'd gotten the Big Ten deal done a little bit earlier, they might have hired Benetti, and he would have been doing the Big Ten. I don't know why they didn't want him for Notre Dame. I think they already were down the road with Collinsworth, but Benetti's better than Collinsworth, and so they could have done that. But yeah, they're definitely going to need to add some people. They have Paul Burmeister on staff, but they seem to have not gone with him when they had the chance. So I think they'll probably look outside.
Yeah, and he was kind of an early one that I think people might have thought would slide into that booth. He's filled in before in the past, but obviously they didn't go that direction. I'm also curious if, again, with adding the extra game now, you're going to have some Saturdays where you have Notre Dame Big Ten doubleheaders or just Big Ten standalone. If a studio show could be maybe in the future for NBC along the lines of Fox, and their big noon kickoff or game day, like if they might try to compete with any of that.
Yeah, I think the issue they'll run into, I have to think, let's say 3:30. If those games are starting, do we know, if I can't remember if we know if those games are starting at 7:30 or 8, I guess they're probably starting at 8. So you might be able to do something because you got to figure the CBS 3:30 game is done, by 7. So maybe they do something where they try to have a show that makes some sense and, and they put some resources into that. I'm sure they're going to have something because, they've got to have a halftime show, but maybe they try to expand out on that.
Just to reiterate, you're optimistic about Notre Dame's potential in this next TV contract, and it also sounds like there probably isn't any change coming in the near future in terms of what the booth looks like next year.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Garrett moves on.
Yeah, I don't think so at this point, but it's still fluid. The season, is just ending the regular season, so then you kind of start looking into those type of things. I think they wanted Jack Collinsworth to improve. I think they made that clear to him during the season. And he's a young guy, so he can get better. And he has gotten. I think he's been a little better. Still, again, not full control of the broadcast, which at that level you kind of expect. It's not a learning level. 20, even if you're 27, if you get that opportunity at 27, the expectation is you're ready to do it. And so, so that's, but I think they're well positioned in terms of what they'll be able to get if they were to, especially if they open it up and not just look for NBC, if they were to be willing to go to ESPN or CBS or Fox, or, they make it work, those networks. If that opportunity comes, my gut is they'll stay at NBC, but if they wanted to use some leverage there, they definitely could probably drive the price up a little bit more.
If they really wanted to irk Notre Dame fans, I saw that you just had this morning, David Shaw, the former Stanford coach now, is kind of the next hot commodity. They could go after David Shaw and put him in the booth next year and have yet another Notre Dame rival in that booth and just Notre Dame fans.
Yeah, that is kind of weird though when they do have the rivals in there, right? I mean, Jason Garrett doesn't fall into that. He went to Princeton, but Drew Brees, a Purdue guy, who was before Brees? I'm trying to recall.
Tony Dungy for a year, and Dungy was good, and he had he had no connections, but you've had guys like Pat Hayden in there, former
Doug
USC
Flutie.
quarterback, Doug Flutie, Boston College, Mayock, Boston College. So you've got all these Notre Dame rivals who have been in the booth.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what the Notre Dame ex-players think about that. I got a feeling they're like, why aren't we in there?
Like it. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who would just say, Jerome Bettis, come on over.
Yeah,
we'll take that. And that's, as a compromise. If you don't just want to have a Notre Dame guy, I realize 3-man booths can be kind of clunky sometimes, but just have a Notre Dame guy and somebody from some other team.
Yeah, you could possibly do that.
It out.
You could do that.
Yeah.
But then you're paying three people. Then you're paying three people. So I don't know if they want to do that necessarily.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You got to watch those expenses now as well. Andrew Marchand from the New York Post, the sports media columnist, and also the co-host of the Marchand and Ourand sports media podcast. It drops every Wednesday morning. So if you're into sports media, especially this time of year, like with going into the off season, now's the time to really start listening even more, because all the juicy stuff with the buildup for football in the off season and all that kind of good stuff. Andrew, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.